All right, so I was just ending talking about the contribution of Aristotle. Um, and he ends up, his concept of dispensing with traditional gods and talking about a prime mover. Some Christians and Jews and Muslim philosophers would later on see Aristotle as perhaps actually believing in one God, and that he was inspired, and that much of what his ideas taught didn't seem to contradict a scriptural tradition. So you had Ibn Rushd, or known as Averroes, later on in the Islamic world, kind of combine Islamic concepts with, the Quran and Aristotle. Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, who would do the same in his Guide to the Perplexed, where he um, ends up using a lot of Aristotle's concepts. And then you're going to have Thomas Aquinas later on, a scholastic with really shaping medieval thought in Europe. So we will end up covering some more of that later. Again, I'm just trying to tell you that Greek philosophy, Greek philosophers definitely left their mark and continue so on the Western world. Okay. I didn't actually, I should have in my slides put out a whole entire thing on Herodotus. He's talked about in the book. I'm not having Herodotus up here on the slide right now, to my discredit. I did talk about Thucydides, but Thucydides and Herodotus are really the guys who leave a major impact on my profession, on history. And, I mentioned in my beginning with my syllabus, if you guys remember looking back to that the Greek word for history is investigations. It means investigations. Okay, and he has a book that's often called the Histories, or in this case, they're translating it as investigations. But the English word history comes from the Greek word historiae, or investigations. Okay, that's what history means, and he really went into trying to figure out the origins of things. And I like the idea of always seeing the word history as an investigation, because you've noticed, as we've discussed theories about ancient civilizations, and how we talked about that there were these back and forth debates about the actual historicity of the Bible and how it lined up with what archaeologists found. What the historian is doing is an investigation. We are not scientists that have, as I was mentioning, a perfect formula to give you a fact in the way that science has a fact, right? And again, this is why I have a problem not with using multiple choice for tests. I'll give you guys a multiple choice test, but to rely on that, because ultimately, when people say, if they want to do a quiz and say, is such and such thing true or false, or they pose a certain question that presupposes that something that is taught is established with no debate. And in fact, historians are debating everything. They debate. I had a professor who debated the use of the term Ethiopian in Greek texts of Homer, and if it was actually referring to Ethiopia, Ethiopians, or somewhere else. There's debates about the investigations on who Homer was. Did he even really exist? Blah, 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 blah. We can go on and on. So again, though, that inquisitiveness that we see with Herodotus, and the moralizing aspects that are brought in by Thucydides, are so fundamental to set the standards for historical analysis in the West, as it's mentioned in the book on 103. So I can't state that enough. So again, Herodotus from the 5th century, from 484 around to 420 BCE, and Thucydides of Athens, basically 5th century BCE. Very important to talk about. Okay, so I talked about the philosophers. I cannot go away without talking about Plato and Socrates. Now, Socrates is believed to be the mentor of Plato, and he writes about him in the way that Jesus had apostles writing about him. Many debate if Socrates, if Plato is really telling a truthful story about Socrates, or he's simply telling his own ideas and using Socrates as a mouthpiece. In any case, we know about the Socratic method that is articulated by the way he's written about from Plato. Now, Plato, he wrote the Republic, which is influential. I think I even mentioned in one of my earlier videos that it's believed that Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran, that created the Islamic Revolution in Iran, got his concept of Vilayat-e Faqih, rule by the jurist or the Islamic scholar, in part from Plato's Republic. So even though he was rabidly, super anti-Western, it's possible that the Islamic Republic of Iran has partially some influence in the way that it structured itself on some of Plato's ideas about a philosopher king. Okay, so Plato is definitely an influential writer. And Socrates, we say the Socratic method is based on how you had posed questions. The legacy of Socrates is that he always was listening and asking questions in which he would trip his opponents. It's not by what he said, but what he asked. Okay? The power of the question. So Euthyphro is a great story. It's a great piece that I would also encourage you to get a chance to explore. So Euthyphro sets himself up as an authority on piety. Okay? And he confidently is claiming to know that he is being pious and prosecuting his father for murder in a controversial case. Okay? Euthyphro states that the gods basically love piety. Okay? Socrates then points out that the gods quarrel over what they like and dislike, so there are many acts that are loved by some gods but hated by others. So Socrates is then, he does it in this question form, but he tells Euthyphro, essentially, well, you're saying the gods are making it pious, but there's actually different ways that the gods approach this within our traditions. And he keeps posing up these questions. So Euthyphro desperately argues the pious is what all gods love. And then Socrates ends it with a clarification in his question. Do the gods love pious acts because they are pious, or are those acts pious because the gods love them? And so he gets to the questioning of the heart of the essence of the debate. And so all I really wanted to point out to you is that that way of thinking and asking a question and how things are posed, that's so unique to Greek thought and is so fundamentally a part of Western analytical thinking, right? And, Socrates is accused of corrupting the youth, and he's told that he can drink hemlock and die, or he can stop teaching and live, and because he gets arrested for causing problems, so Plato writes. And Socrates famously takes the hemlock and he says, the unexamined life is not worth living. And he drinks it and dies a martyr to that concept. That really epitomizes the kind of legacy of the Greeks when it comes to that way of thinking. So hopefully that helps in just covering some of those basic things. The last thing to talk about is the legacy of scientific thought. And I can go over arts and sculpture and painting and architecture as well. The male nude sculptures that you see in architecture, the columns, so much of that. And we'll kind of cover that over again later with Rome. So what I'd like to do is just end with my last lecture just being a piece that Carl Sagan put out. Okay, you should enjoy that, where he really kind of passionately and poetically talks about the legacy of the Greeks on scientific thought and the birth of science. And hopefully you'll have enjoyed kind of covering this and seeing this as so clear as an influence on the way that we think and do things, and even coming to studying from a university in a college setting, we get all this from the Greeks. All right, kalinichta, as they say in Greek. Good night.